Welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Woo. I'm Jennie Marie.
I'm Stacey.
And we're here to help you demystify psychedelics and really go beyond the woo when it comes to psychedelics. And what a great place to start today with how you, Stacey, are helping to demystify psilocybin with your new book.
Yes, my new book. I'm going to be a little greedy and just show it to everybody. Mushroom Pharmacy, available everywhere from Hachette, Black Dog and Leventhal publishers. It was so much fun writing this book. It was an incredible experience because it really helped me demystify it for myself and see the ways that I could talk to clients about the research that's going on and also kind of prepare myself and, the practice and our associates and the people that we work with that, psychedelics is about to have a huge shift on psychiatry and psychology. The practice is going to change completely once psychedelics really, especially psilocybin, once it really enters the mix.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And it's kind of like you're ahead of the curve because as we know, it actually isn't really readily allowed here in the U.S. So that had been really interesting. One, maybe you can start with how did you even come about writing this book when really access to psilocybin is pretty limited here? Obviously, we know people are getting it, so we want to be responsible about that. But it's not something we can do here in California as therapists, but you can go elsewhere where it's decriminalized. But maybe start with how did you happen to write this book?
It's a little, in the vein of demystifying things. It's a little unexciting, to be honest. So I had a contract with my agent to write this book, Queen's Path, and my agent and I were talking about what can I do, what do I do for work, what are my interests, where do I want to put my effort and my resources. And I said, well, I'm doing this, I'm a psychedelic therapist and I'm interested in consciousness and neuroscience, and I'm really interested in doing something neuroscientific next. And he's like, you're a psychedelic therapist? And then he went ahead and told me about all his own personal psychedelic experiences.
Oh, that's always fun, right?
And I was like, okay, yes. And he's like, I think you should write a book about psychedelics. And I was like, I don't know if I'm the right person to write a book about psychedelics. And he's like, no, you're totally the right person. I was like, oh, okay, well, we can talk about it later.
And then is it ding from the universe? You're going to write a book?
It was ding from the universe that I was going to write the book because he got a request from the publisher, Black Dog and Leventhal, for a book on psilocybin mushrooms. And he wrote back to me. It happened almost immediately. He's like, hey, you know how we were talking about that the other day? I just got this request for proposals. And you know this because you write books. It's hard to get an agent. And he said, I want you to write a proposal. And I wrote a proposal trying to make him happy because I was like, if they're reaching out to my agent, they're reaching out to all kinds of agents. I am probably the unlikely candidate here. So they had written a previous book called Cannabis Pharmacy. And it had done very well, which is why they wanted to do Mushroom Pharmacy as a companion book. And so I went and looked at Cannabis Pharmacy and basically saw that it had been really well researched, all about the mechanisms of action and the biology and the research that was going on around the world. I was like, oh, that actually sounds really fun. So I wrote a proposal that was very similar. Here's the neuroscience of how psilocybin works. Here are the mechanisms of action. Here's how it works with mushrooms. Here's how you, do things like forage and grow them and, because they wanted that. And then I got to really spend like months in the research, which I was, me, I'm a big science nerd. Yeah. So I was just like eating up the research that was happening all around the world.
Exactly. You're a big science nerd. So it's so funny to me when you say, I don't know if I'm the right person to write this book because, we have these conversations. I'm the light and fluffy, and you bring the research. So, I'm the person that I will take people to Mexico. I'm barefoot. I'm running around the jungle. I'm not as woo-woo as some of the people can get woo-woo, but you're always grounded in the research. And you remember these facts and the deep information and the neuroscience. So it is so interesting to me when you say, I don't know if I was the right person. Clearly you were the right person.
I'm actually really happy with the way the book turned out. It was so much fun to write, and it's got lots of information. And this particular publisher, Black Dog and Leventhal, they do books where they include illustrations. So I got to include illustrations not only of all the different mushroom varieties and species, but also of the neuroscience, right? Like, so any, you know this because we work together, but like my clients probably get tired of my metaphor speech, but everything's a metaphor for me. So I talk about, oh, this is how the neurons work, and this is how this chemical works in your brain. And I got to do that in the book, and it's so nerdy and fun. Like, it's like a shipping port. Your brain has neurons, and the synapse is like a shipping port. It's just dumb and silly and fun. And they had a professional artist draw it for me, and it was great.
That's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was surprising in the research that you came across that maybe, because we did that year-long fellowship where we did learn a lot,
Absolutely.
but now you were deep diving specifically into psilocybin. What was really surprising that you came across?
Oh man, there was so much. I think my favorite research was coming out of like UCSD, UC San Diego, UCSF, Johns Hopkins, the Langone Center in New York. Like all of these big medical centers are doing research on psilocybin to help particular populations, not only with mental health challenges, but with other challenges like chronic pain. The most fascinating one for me, and I think you've heard me talk about this before, but it's worth repeating. The folks at UCSD did a study on phantom limb pain.
Oh, yes.
And, for decades, medicine has believed that phantom limb pain is actually a hallucination, that the person can't accept that their leg is gone or their hand is gone. And so the hallucination is part of that resistance. The research in psilocybin has shown us that is 100% not true.
Wow.
It is not a hallucination. What happens is the brain, when we're babies and as we grow older, the brain has a map of the body. And that when somebody loses a limb, that map has to be adjusted.
Wow.
So you need neuroplasticity to adjust the map. And the less neuroplastic you are, the longer it takes for the map to adjust, if ever. And psilocybin helps the brain remap the body so people recover from phantom limb pain faster using psilocybin.
That's pretty incredible.
Is that amazing?
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Well, and I love this piece of like your body needs a map, and the neuroplasticity is the key to helping to rewrite the map.
Right.
Which, I mean, so much of what this medicine is doing for people is help rewriting maps with how we look at the world, how we perceive ourselves, view of others. Yeah. We're able to soften things. We're able to, grow, change, see things in a different light. So in this, they're actually remapping their body into a new light and being able to see that differently.
Exactly. And when that happens, when the body goes, oh, that's not supposed to be there anymore, then the pain is gone. Right. Wow. So that's one of the ways. And almost all of the research that people are engaging in requires an actual trip, with one exception, and that is chronic pain. And this was another really fascinating study, also done out of UC San Diego, that they had these folks who'd been in terrible accidents, people who are in wheelchairs, people who can't really walk, and in constant pain. And different folks, different types of pain, and little bit of psilocybin for some of them, a lot of psilocybin for others. Went from, if you've ever been to the doctor and you have that pain scale that's like a 10 or a 0, going from a 10 to a 1 or a 2 or a 0 for the duration of the time that they have the exposure to the psilocybin. So we know that it's like a week, right?
Yeah.
And people take the psilocybin, sometimes a small dose, sometimes a medium or a hero dose, and no pain. Like, it's so different from opiates, right? Because opiates, they create all of these problems in the body, create all these problems of digestion, and they're addictive. Psilocybin's not addictive. It doesn't affect that part of the brain where we see people become addicted.
Mm.
And so you can have someone who takes psilocybin for pain in this controlled way, right? You wouldn't, I'm not telling people go get some mushrooms for your back pain, but they're finding that this research shows that there are places that psilocybin can go that our current medical understanding hasn't caught up yet.
Yeah. What's so incredible about this is the medical aspect of it, and, obviously, psilocybin's been used recreationally so often, and we talk about as clinicians how important the medicine is from the set and the setting, and that there is a medical frame for using this. But this is such a beautiful example of the medical frame of the use of this, where traditional medicine is failing individuals. The opiates are failing individuals. Not only is it leading to addiction, but it's not actually healing in any way. And here's a medicine that's actually remapping, healing, and for the most part, without side effects.
Without too many side effects. Yeah. Like any, we know from doing the kind of work we do that, you don't, if you have a big dose of anything, if you have a big dose of cough medicine, you don't want to like go to work or drive your car or something. But, so that's like the biggest thing. And, opiates and alcohol and cannabis, they all affect a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, where that's where addiction happens, right? It's this overfiring of dopamine in addiction. And psilocybin doesn't act on that part of the brain.
Yeah.
So you don't see that level of addiction you have people who will choose to dissociate or something like that. That's not the same as like physical addiction, right? You're not getting the same effects. So yeah, there's relatively little chance for addiction with psilocybin, and it's doing all kinds of good. That's like just pain and phantom limb. There's research going on for Parkinson's disease, that it's having positive effects on people who have tremors and who have, brain fog and are losing their memory with Parkinson's. Positive outcomes. There's research that's going on, obviously, in treatment-resistant depression and anxiety. End-of-life care. They're using it for, that whole end-of-life journey. And people come away from those treatments, done a lot of this at Johns Hopkins, not being afraid of dying anymore. And these are people who have like stage 4 cancer and they don't have a good prognosis, but they have these experiences, and then they're like, oh, I'm actually going to be okay. Like it's, making peace with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Well, and so one of the things is also teaching people to be responsible.
Yes.
So in that, approaching this very interesting intersection of you're writing a book where technically, unless you're in an area where it's been decriminalized, but really if we look at it on the federal government side, this is not decriminalized, So how did you navigate that intersection of helping people understand being responsible with this medicine?
Well, throughout the book, it says this is not legal in most places yet. I also, said a lot about the safety or not safety of, if you're doing it recreationally, you need to be really, really careful. Number one, where you're getting your mushrooms from, where you're getting psilocybin from. And honestly, if you just pay attention for a little longer, it'll probably be legal pretty soon. Like it's, the science is going to eclipse everything pretty, I would argue within the next couple of years. I think the only reason it's not legal everywhere is that people are afraid of it and nobody knows how to make money with it yet. Like,
Right.
it's a natural-ish substance.
Well, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, like, was there some maneuvering to have this scheduled because, drug companies were like, well, we can't market this. We can't, we really can't do anything to like massively sell this. And they're trying to do these studies of like, well, if we can, be able to distill and use part of the mushroom and create a medicine, like for example, without the journey, without the trip effect. But we're actually finding that that's not, providing the same level of relief for many individuals. So there, it's a natural substance. You can't patent a natural substance unless you can modify it into some type that.
Well, you can patent a natural substance, but there's a lot of blockage to that, right? So, but the other thing, I think, to your point, right? Like we are as a community, as consumers, as patients, we should be putting more pressure on our senators, on our governors. You know, California, everybody thought 2 years ago that Newsom was going to decriminalize psilocybin, and he chose not to. But the way he did it was actually pretty smart. What he did was he created a trigger legislation so that when the FDA deschedules psilocybin or any of the psychedelic medicines, it's automatically decriminalized in California. So, and there's good reasons for that, right? Like, there's been a lot of complications in the cannabis industry. There's, you know, how do we do money? How do we do banking? There's some not so great practices out there. So I think he was trying to avoid that. And certainly, you know, Oregon and Colorado have had to be like super careful, and they keep going back and revising their guidelines and revising their rules about who can be a practitioner, who can be a patient. How is it? How do you do it? And it's so expensive now because they have all these guidelines. So,
right. I mean, that is the interesting piece where people are profiting right now with psilocybin, or these service centers in Oregon and Colorado, because of all the legislation and all the regulations around that. It's not really accessible for many people, which that's really challenging too. Is the accessibility factor. And I think this is why we see a lot of individuals, you know, finding means to obtain, you know, psilocybin without going through service centers. And, you know, we certainly we see some tremendous benefit of helping people understand of what it's like to do this on your own versus sitting with a practitioner. Was there anything new as you were writing this book that you really tried to include in the book about those differences of doing this on your own, foraging in the wilderness versus sitting with, you know, a trained clinician?
There was so much. I mean, the first one was really, you know, trying to get people to act responsibly, not just for themselves, but for the environment, right? Like, there are rules in Washington, for example, about over foraging. So you have to be really careful. But the idea that you can just go out in the woods, find some shrooms and bring them home and make tea is like a terrible idea for a number of reasons. Number one, like, the majority of psilocybin mushrooms that we are familiar with look remarkably similar to Gallerina mushrooms that are poisonous and will kill you.
Oh, wow.
And they tend to flush or grow right next to each other. So if you're not spore printing every single sample that you take, then you are running the risk of taking something that's really, that could kill you. It's very serious.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And then on top of that, there are two other things that happen with mushrooms that are scary and people should know about. One is mushrooms tend to grow in places where environments are changing. So when the mycelium is already under the earth, and the mushrooms, the fruiting bodies, come up when there's been some change to the earth, right? Like, either it's just rained or there's been some, you know, change of the landscape by cutting or cutting back or deforestation or, you know, cutting down trees or whatever. And in those kinds of environments, sometimes is land that has some bad things in it. Like, if there's been a house that burned down, or there's been, you know, an old logging trail or something where there's been petroleum.
Oh, so you're talking about it could be toxic.
Yes.
Wow.
The mushrooms clean up the environment, and those heavy metals and those chemicals wind up in the fruiting bodies.
So mushrooms become like the catfish
Yes.
of the forest.
Yes. That's a great analogy. Yes, that's exactly what happens. And they do it. It's so fascinating. Like, these networks of different types of mushrooms, they pull those metals away from trees and other living things to keep the forest safe and clean for all those other types of living things.
Wow. So that's really beautiful on one hand.
But don't eat them.
But don't eat them.
There might be lead in those.
Oh, wow.
Right?
So is there a way for people to find out if the mushrooms are safe?
No.
No.
No,
No.
unless you are a chemist
Uh-huh.
and you have a laboratory in your house and you can go and test for different metals from your samples or different substances from your samples. No.
So, in theory, it sounds like such a fun thing to do. Let's go into the forest. Let's go find a mushroom. Let's have a beautiful experience. Because let's face
In
it, people
nature, yeah.
love psilocybin in nature,
Mhm.
but it actually could be really dangerous.
Yeah, and I didn't tell you the scariest one yet.
Oh, no. There's something more
Something
beyond
more
the
scary.
catfish of the forest?
Yes, beyond the catfish of the forest, there is something that happens with mushrooms that grow in or on trees. And it's when the mushroom has like this relationship with the tree where it's helping the tree clean out, catfish the tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the condition that happens with these mushrooms is called wood lovers paralysis.
Oh, paralysis.
Paralysis.
Like I could be like, I could have my mushroom. I could be sitting there and then all of a sudden I'm just like out, not moving.
And you're conscious.
And you're conscious.
So you can't move.
Ooh.
You can't speak. The only thing you can do is breathe
Wow.
and blink your eyes.
And how long could that last
24 to 48 hours.
20, you mean I could be laying in the forest for 24 to 48 hours with my eyes open, blinking. I can't talk.
Right.
I can't move.
Right.
And people be like,
Is she
"No,
dead?
She alive?"
Right.
Huh?
And you have no way to tell them.
Wow. And to be trapped in there.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's terrifying. Like
That is
you
terrifying.
don't want wood lovers paralysis. Like it's, and it's funny, like you go back, when I was doing the research, go back through some of these books of these older mycologists or people who have, done the thing of going into the woods and be like, oh, this looks good, like, and tried it and then wind up with wood lovers paralysis. And they're like, yeah, it's terrifying, but it passes in 24 to 48 hours.
What? This sounds like they were just kind of it's terrifying, but it passes.
It passes. I'm like, I know.
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of times you go into these journeys to find relief and to have that
Right.
experience. I'm not sure I'm going to have relief afterwards.
No, not at all.
I'll be definitely going to do some trauma therapy work then.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So
wow.
these are really good reasons not to just go in the woods and pick your own mushrooms.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, there are some other ones like, there was an article about some kids in Montecito after the mudslides that, mudslides are a place where mushrooms pop up all the time, and psilocybin mushrooms particularly. And these kids, I mean, they didn't wind up like getting hurt or anything, but it was very dangerous, and they, fell into the mudslide and trying to get to the shrooms. And it's like, oh, come on now.
Oh, wow.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, in your book also, you do talk about growing. So
Yeah.
this might be the reason why, like, you don't actually want to go forage. You want to grow them. Of course, not legal to do
it's
so.
not legal to
So we
grow
can't
them.
advise you to do it.
No.
But, you could understand that once this does become legal, maybe growing it or finding from someone
Mhm.
who knows how to grow. Because it's not a simple process.
No.
You researched like this process because like in other countries where it is legal,
Mm-hmm.
people are, have played with all different types of tubs and setups and
Mhm.
how do we actually grow these?
Well, and there, people, it's legal to grow functional mushrooms. Like you could grow lion's mane mushrooms. The process is not terribly different, right? But yeah, there's a little more sensitivity to psilocybin mushrooms. And I read some of the classic people who have written guides on this, some of the underground guides, and I didn't copy them, but I looked across all the ones that are reputable and did a little experimentation to see, like, not with psilocybin mushrooms, I'll be, transparent.
You did functional.
I
you
did
say
functional mushrooms to see
okay.
if it worked the
right.
same way, and it does.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was kind of, it's a little wonky. You have to really take care of it. You have to watch it. You can't get too wet, can't get too dry.
And you have to be patient.
You have to be patient. It
Right?
takes, and you have to, because, you put them in a dark closet and you have to wait until they kind of figure out what's going on in the dark. And then you have to expose them to light, and you have to expose them to water. And then they, it's like
Yeah.
this whole
And it
thing.
could take months.
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 Mhm. Months.
Yeah.
Depending on the species. But
Species. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Was there like a substrate or a soil that you found that was like really ideal that over and over again people were talking about?
I mean, for the most part, they talked a lot about like picking substrates that are almost anything. Like, some people liked oat flour, some people liked rice, some people liked rye bran. Like there's all kinds of ways of like starting the substrate out and beginning the process. So it really depends on the
Well,
person.
and in the wild, they can be growing in some dung pile.
Oh,
right?
yeah, poop.
Yeah, some poop. So I mean, I think people sometimes grow these functional mushrooms, probably the other as well, as we know, in manure loving, because there's manure loving.
Yeah, Psilocybin cubensis loves the poop.
Yeah, loves the poop, which is really interesting because I know when I've grown some functional mushrooms and I go to pluck that, you have a little bit of dangling there. And so I'm like, oh my goodness. So if we're growing that in some manure, you want to be careful to like really
you have to clean it.
Clean that.
Yeah.
Because then you're getting some extra nutrients. I don't know if you want those extra nutrients. No.
No, thank you. No poop for me.
Yeah, no.
But it's interesting because with psilocybin mushrooms in particular, right? Like you are looking for, you want the bluing of the mushroom, right? And when you see if you pick it out in the wild or if you're growing them yourselves, like when you pick it, you're gonna bruise it, and it turns kind of bluish green, almost black, and it makes it look like it's bad, right? Like it's might be funky, and it's like no, that's actually the evidence that the psilocybin is present. That it's turning this bluish brown color.
So you want a blue mushroom.
You want a blue mushroom. You want it to look a little funky.
A little funky.
Yeah, but you do want to clean it, especially if my brother has this story when he wrote a letter to me a couple of years ago when I was first talking about doing this book. He's like, I want to tell you my story of being I think he was 11-year-old psychonaut. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And evidently, when we were little kids, the neighbor like took him out to some pasture where there was horses and cows and got a whole huge like pile of mushrooms. And
at 11?
At 11. So my brother was 11. The neighbors were 13 and 14. So he was the youngest of the three neighbors.
And they partook of it?
Oh yeah. They were messed up all week and made this like concoction, this tea in the neighbor's kitchen. I think I was already gone. I might have already been away at college or something. Or no, because I'm only 5 years older than him. So I must have been like my dad's house or something. And my mom, I guess, was just kind of not paying attention.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I'm not sure how you missed that one with an 11-year-old, because you got to imagine
Well, I think he went to spend the night at the 13-year-old's house. Wow. So I think that's how that happened.
Oh, my goodness. Well, just talking about like the tea, there's a couple different ways in which people will take psilocybin. So what were some of the things that you read about? Was there like an ideal way to actually take your psilocybin?
There's not an ideal way. It really depends on each person. So tea is a kind of common one that people will make a tea with the mushrooms. There was a lot of controversy about stems, no stems, right? Is there as much psilocybin in the stem as in the cap? And the answer really depends on the species, right? It's not consistent. So you can, for most of them, you can throw the whole thing in no matter what you're doing. There's a lot of question about dried versus fresh. Fresh is typically preferred, but dried will last a little longer. But psilocybin also breaks down really quickly and really fast, especially if you freeze it. So you never want to put your mushrooms in the freezer.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a big surprise to tell people that we've tried these, I would hope that you know how to do this if you're a therapist writing a book about psilocybin. But
we went to Oregon.
Yeah.
And we did our training up there. And, and up there when I went to my training in the service center, so this was a certified service center in Oregon. So we were in the, within the legal guidelines established by that state. And yes, you could either just pop your whole mushroom, was what I chose to do. Yeah. I just popped mine. Mine was, I don't know. It was okay.
Yeah.
I know some people made teas.
I like the chocolate.
Some people made some hot chocolate and put their psilocybin in there. Some people did a little lemon. Yeah.
I haven't come across that one, but that would make sense too. Like just make it a little less
Mm-hmm.
fungi like
Fungi.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
tastes like fungi,
Yeah, yeah. Chocolate sounds good.
yeah, the
You know?
chocolate is probably my preference. And
Mhm.
people are microdosing too, so and a lot of times they will dry the mushrooms and then pulverize them, put them in capsules.
Mhm.
And when they do that, it's a little easier to get a measurement. You're not getting a measurement of psilocybin, but you're getting a measurement of the mushroom,
Mm.
right? So you can weigh it, and then you know exactly how much you're getting. If you're getting, zero point 0.1 ounce of mushroom or something like that, would give you a good idea of at least how much psilocybin
Mm.
there might be in
Right.
there.
Which is, I mean, that's an interesting piece too, because
Hmm.
you really don't know unless you're can actually test for,
Hmm.
how much psilocybin am I getting? Actually, I could have a really big mushroom, and I think like, oh my goodness, there's gonna be a lot of psilocybin there, but it can really vary.
Absolutely. Hmm.
And so you have to kind of tread cautiously and not just go like, well, that's a tiny one. Maybe I'll
Right.
just take 3 or 4 of those and see what happens. So like when we went to the service center,
Hmm.
they started us off and then checked in with us
Hmm.
about 30 minutes later. How you doing? You want to take a little more?
Hmm.
And you could take a little more if you wanted to really go for, try to get a hero dose
Yeah,
size.
yeah.
So it's an interesting. So this is why I think you really want to make sure you have someone with you, and ideally have someone who's not partaking so
Exactly.
that they're able to kind of help you navigate
Yeah.
during this and help you determine, do I take more, is this enough dose? Yeah.
It's so fascinating too. And one of the important things I learned in doing the research that I didn't know was that psilocybin is an absolute dose, not a weight dependent dose. So a lot of the other substances that we, use, like ketamine, is weight dependent. So you're you're doing it zero point 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight when you first do the first dose with someone. So usually that starts off someone between 30 and 50 milligrams of ketamine. But with psilocybin, it doesn't matter if you're a 300-pound linebacker or a 100-pound ballerina. The dose is going to affect you the same way because it's
Hmm.
about how it's translated. Your body weight doesn't matter. It's translated absolutely via the liver.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
yeah. So if
Really.
you're in a, if you're in a situation where you think, oh, I'm little, I don't need very much, or I'm really big, I need more, that's erroneous. You're going to wind up probably over taking enough to give you a hero dose, and maybe you don't want a hero dose.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's a good point.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, was there anything else that in your book, you're like, this is really important. This is key that I want to make sure that my readers understand?
The big one was, don't trust the foraging process. Like you really, you
Hmm.
need to not just eat mushrooms off the forest floor. So that was a big one. Throughout the book, it says, beware the little brown mushroom. But I think more than anything, I wanted people to understand that psychiatry and psychology are going to change. And we need them to change. I mean, you and I talk about this all the time. Just in our office, like people are not being helped by traditional pharmaceuticals anymore. Like maybe when they first came out, drugs like Lexapro and Paxil and those things were revolutionary, but they really aren't, doing the job anymore.
Hmm.
I don't know that they ever were, but they were something in a sea of nothing. And now we have an option, and it's so much better. I mean, the research on psilocybin versus uh, escitalopram, I guess that's Paxil, um, is that Paxil um, narrows your capacity, your tolerance for feeling, so that you only feel, you don't feel the high highs and you don't feel the low lows. So it just kind of keeps you in this narrow window. Whereas psilocybin expands your capacity for feeling.
Wow.
That's the current research that's being done. It's been reproduced now several times at UC San Francisco and in England and at the Langone Center in New York. They keep finding this. So what psilocybin can do for people is give them the capacity to tolerate more.
Ah,
And in the
yes.
the way that you and I work and the kind of people that we see, like that is what is needed. People don't need to feel less, they need to tolerate more. And so I think that's what I would want people to come away from having read my book, is that this is going to change how we think about psychiatry and psychology, and I hope for the better. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one last thing that I think is important too for individuals to know is, yes, this may be coming soon,
Hmm.
um, if you're going to go in to do a journey, it is important that you talk to your doctor and
Yes.
work off of your medications, because we do not want you to have a serotonin syndrome,
Yes.
and which can be deadly.
Yes.
It can be fatal.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this when people go and work in these underground places where you're not actually working with trained medical individuals,
Right.
and they didn't know to check to find out what
Right, what kind of
medications are
medicine
you
you're on.
taking.
Yeah.
And not that we want people to stop their antidepressants like this so that they can go have a medicine journey. You want to do that responsibly, and we do that in our practice by helping them with through ketamine. But it's really important, again, while obviously this has been used recreationally a lot, but there is some really good guidance in working with a provider.
Absolutely. And it's harm reduction, right? Any psychiatrist or neurologist who you might be working with, if you ask them, should I take psilocybin, they have to tell you no. But if you tell them, I'm going to take psilocybin, what do I need to know? They can help you have a harm reduction option for your medication. And I'm going to get science nerd again, but like all of those medicines work on the HT2A receptor and HT2B receptor in the brain for serotonin, and you need those channels, those neurotransmitter channels, to be working well. And psilocybin goes right to them. And if you aren't taking care of them, if you aren't paying attention, then you can induce serotonin syndrome, because if you mix them with your antidepressants, if you mix them with your antipsychotics, then you have too much serotonin in your brain. Your brain will stop producing it immediately, and you're just going to have this big drop. And we don't want people to have seizures, and we don't want people to have other problems where they have to go to the hospital. And so please, if you are taking any kind of serotonin agonist, don't, or serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like, don't just stop taking your medicine, and don't just take some psilocybin.
Yes. And this is exactly why we do this podcast, is to help you go beyond the woo.
Yes.
And understand the science, which Stacey is so good at that, people. Like, she's rattling it off, and I'm sitting there going, yeah, I remember reading this. So get your book, A Mushroom Pharmacy, today. Learn how to responsibly use these medicines as they come out. And, check us out. Give us a call. Subscribe, follow, share this with your friends and family. If you're going to venture into the world of psychedelics, do it responsibly, and make sure you have someone who can help be your guide. Thanks, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Beyond the Woo.
If you like our show, I want to encourage you to pick up a copy of my book, Mushroom Pharmacy, as everything you're going to need to go beyond the woo. All the science, all the preparation, everything you could possibly want. It's right here in the book, Mushroom Pharmacy. Go get a copy.
So are you ready to go beyond the woo? Are you curious about your own psychedelic journey? Come join me in Mexico. Check out my next retreats at psychedelicplantmedicineretreat.com.